In episode 3, part 3 picks up where part 2 left off. When we last left the Thundercats in the Feliner, well, good news, the Feliner has the booster rocket, so now the Thundercats are on their way to New Thundera for their rescue mission. Also, the good news is that the Rat Star is stranded on Hook Mountain, for now anyway. Now here comes the bad news. According to Lynx-o in the Tower of Omens, they just told the Thundercats that Mumm-ra is probably already there, summoning the sword of Plunn-dar. But he's not alone because his canine pal Mumm-ra is also there. So back with Mumm-ra's ancient spirits of evil, after they had listened to Mumm-ra's plea, they bestowed the sword of Plunn-dar for him. So Mumm-ra was pleased to see that it worked, and so he told his canine pal that. So just like what Lionel did to the Sword of Omens, Mumm-ra has called the sword of Plunn-dar to come to him, and so it did. So after that, Mumm-ra had pleaded his case with his canine pal to say, now that we got the sword, now all we have to do is find the long lost treasures. And when we do, we'll have the Thundercats in our grasp, and then they'll be doomed forever. Them being the Thundercats, that is. So back with the enslaved Snarfs, they're still being held prisoners for Mumm-ra and his canine pal since back in part 2. And they're finding the long lost treasures for him, so that's why they were forced to work. So there's one of the enslaved Snarfs, Snarf Oswald. He was being barked at by Mama because he was exhausted. So Snarf Oswald, after he was scared to death by Mama's barking, he says, all right, I'm moving as fast as I could. But then he accidentally ran into Snarf Egbert. So Snarf Egbert had started to plead his case. He said, I don't know about you, but I think this treasure hunt is a waste of time. But then, before his eyes, that's when Snarf Egbert saw something very interesting. That's one of the pieces of the treasure. But then, long story short, after the two Snarfs were excited to find out that there is a piece of the treasure, Mumm-ra just steals it from them and then heads it to the pyramid's tomb chamber where Mumm-ra is. So back with Mumm-ra in the pyramid's tomb chamber, Mumm-ra gave him the piece of a treasure. So after Mumm-ra had heard the good news, he suspected that it has all kinds of jewels and everything else, including the secrets of the Thundercats, just like we mentioned 2 episodes ago. So Mumm-ra told his canine pal, go, make those Snarfs work harder than before. So Mumm-ra agrees. Back with the Feliner, as we mentioned back in the last episode, they have now arrived on New Thundera. Also, we learned in the last episode they were trying to hurry to get to the treasures on Thundera first before Mumm-ra gets his hands on it. And if he does, this could mean bad news. So back with the Thundercats in the Feliner, that's when the Thundercats just couldn't wait to catch Mumm-ra by surprise when they arrive at the pyramid, according to what both Lionel and Panther has said. So good news, they managed to find a place to land the Feliner. So the first ones out were Snarf and his nephew. So Snarfer says, hey, what are we waiting for? Let's go. So Snarfer, after he pleads his case to say we should free the Snarfs, that's when Lionel says, wait a minute, not so fast. But Snarf has his turn to plead his case to say, what are you talking about? Mumm-ra is enslaving no Snarfs out there, he said. So after Snarf had suggested to Lionel that they should free the Snarfs, they being himself and his nephew, Lionel says, we will. But we have to find those treasures first, he suggested. So Chitara not only agrees with Lionel, but then told the two Snarfs, you know something, Lionel's right. We had to find the treasures in the Sword of Plunn-dar first. Unfortunately, the Thundercats were not aware that in the beginning of their episode, Mumm-ra had already gotten the Sword of Plunn-dar first, before they did. So Snarf has his turn to ask a question. Are you saying that it's more important than freeing the Snarfs themselves? So Panther went first to say no, and then agrees with Snarf to say, freeing the Snarfs are important. Then Tiger has his turn to plead his case after he agrees with Panthro. He said that if you try to free those Snarfs first before we find the treasure and the sword, then Chitara goes next to agree with Tiger. Then this can mean the end of all of us. and we'll all be slaves, including the Snarfs themselves, Chitara said. Then both Panther and Lionel had told Snarf and his nephew even the worst case scenario, that if Mumm-ra gets rid of both the Thundercats and of course the Snarfs themselves, then that means that he can rule both New Thundera and the Third Earth themselves as well. So after Lionel had told the Snarfs that even worst of all that the whole mission would be for nothing, that's when Snarf, who told his nephew before he pleased his case to say, "Come on, Lionel's right," and so they head off. So long story short, later that night, the Thundercats are sleeping, well, except for Snarf and Panthro. So while Panthro's on guard duty, he had no idea that Snarf just snuck up right behind him. So after Panthro knew it was Snarf who snuck up behind him, he says, "Oh, it's you. You scared me," he said. Well, first of all, Snarf apologized to Panthro. Then he suggested that he should take over guard duty for a while. At first, Panthro thought about it, but then Snarf also suggested to say to Panthro, "It looks like you're going to need some rest." After Panthro thought about it, he says, "Well, you're absolutely right. I do need some rest," he said, and so he heads off. But instead of being on guard duty, Snarf went ahead to wake up his nephew. So Snarf told his nephew, "Come on, we gotta go rescue the Snarfs." "But what about what Lionel said?" Snarfer said. "I thought you agreed with him." "Well, the Thundercats do what was right for them," Snarf says. "So what if we Snarfs do what is right for us?" he said. So Snarf told his nephew, "It's time we have our own rescue mission to fulfill, like rescuing our family and friends," he said. So finally Snarfer agrees with his uncle, and they both head off. So Snarf told his nephew, "But first we're going to need all the equipment from the Feliner." So when they arrived at the Feliner, they're going to take the anti-gravity boost, the thermal suits, and the infrared goggles from there. And then while inside, now that they got all the equipment they need, that's when Snarf told his nephew, "These anti-gravity boosts and the thermal suits and the infrared goggles are what we need." The Snarf went on to tell his nephew these will help a lot. So long story short, after leaving the Feliner and got the equipment they needed, that's when both of the Snarfs tried on the infrared goggles and the anti-gravity boost, and they both seemed to work really well. So, long story short, the two Snarfs head off. So long story short, back with the Feliner, Lionel was the first to wake up and told Chitara and the others that the Snarfs are missing. So Panther got upset because he just told his case to Lionel that Snarf must have tricked him into switching shifts with him. So what Lionel has suspected is that both Snarf and his nephew are going to rescue the Snarfs themselves. So Chitara, who agrees with Panther, she suspected the exact same thing as he did. Then Tigra went on to explain and suspected the same thing as Chitara's Panther did, and then told this news to Lionel. So Chitara, after she confirms it with Panther and Tiger's suspicions and is indeed correct, she says that this is a serious problem, because if Mumm-ra was found by the Snarfs before the Thundercats did, then this mission would be for nothing and it'll be ruined. So back with Snarf and his nephew, who just left the Feliner moments ago, they went to see that there are indeed Snarfs down there, and so it's up to Snarfer and his uncle to go rescue them. So Snarfer made that suggestion to his uncle to say, "If we can just convince those Snarfs that there is still hope and to never give up, we may pull this off. We should have our own Snarf rebellion," he said. So back with Snarf and his nephew, they're now on their way to achieve their goal to succeed in their mission. One of the first things they did is that they joined up with the enslaved Snarfs, to trick Mumm-ra, of course. And then they went inside to where all the rest of the Snarfs are working, including Snarf Egbert and Snarf Oswald. Now Snarf and his nephew just couldn't believe what they'd seen. So both Snarf and his nephew have a plan. So what they did is that once they saw that there's Oswald and Egbert there, they threw a rock to distract them. So once the two Snarfs are distracted, that's when Snarfer says, "It's us!" So all four of the Snarfs came out, hugged, danced, and was glad to see each other. But when Mumm-ra saw what had happened, he ran off. So back with Mumm-ra, who's Mumm-ra's psychic, he went inside the tomb chamber. So after Mumm-ra woke up and saw Mumm-ra, his psychic, he went to the cauldron. And what he saw was unbelievable. All four Snarfs reunited. So after Mumm-ra saw what happened in the cauldron, he got upset. And he couldn't help but ask himself, what are Snarf and Snarfer doing there? And couldn't help but ask himself, are the Thundercats there too? So, aha, Mumm-ra has a plan. What better way to catch all four of the Snarfs at once and interrogate them? To investigate, if you will. So what Mumm-ra did is that he did what he normally does. Ask his spirits of evil to change from his mummified form to his monstrous form just like any bad guy would do. So that's what happened. So after that, Mumm-ra and his canine pal are on a mission. So what Mumm-ra did is that he told his canine pal that they should be taught a lesson that they'll never forget. So back with the Snarfs, now that they're happy to see each other, Oswald went first to ask what they're doing here, and so Snarf had to explain that they're on a mission with the Thundercats. So Oswald wanted to know if it was true what Snurfer and Snurf said. Well, Snurfer said that not only that it is true, but he pleaded his case to say we're getting everyone out of here and making Mumm-ra pay and etc. That's when Mumm-ra appears out of nowhere. So Mumm-ra says, really? So Snarf and his nephew ran off, but Egbert and Oswald couldn't move anywhere because their legs are in chains. So after Mumm-ra was sent by his psychic Mumm-ra to catch the rest of the Snarfs, as for Mumm-ra, he pleaded his case with Snarfer to say he's not going to escape that easily. So what he did is that he, however, puts a spell on Snarfer. Back with Mumm-ra, who's Mumm-ra's psychic, he grabs Snarf by his tail, of course. So long story short, back with the two Snarfs who couldn't go anywhere at the moment, that's when Mumm-ra uses his powers on the pillar, by accident, of course, and that causes the two Snarfs to make their escape. Of course, since half the chains are being broken thanks to Mumm-ra's power, Mumm-ra was chasing after the two Snarfs. Well, just when things were looking bad, luckily for Oswald, he manages to get away. So long story short, after Oswald had made his escape, he went into the hole in the wall. So after he barricades it, Mumm-ra tries to get in, but no such luck. So Mumm-ra says, never mind that. When Mumm-ra looked over his shoulder, he can tell that Mumm-ra had already taken care of the three Snarfs, Snarf Egbert, Snurfer, and Snarf. So he told his canine pal, I have a better idea. So Mumm-ra suggested to his canine pal to let Oswald find the Thundercats instead, and then bring them to him. So Mumm-ra also pleaded a case to say what better way to convince Lionel to use his sword of omens to find the treasure. But Snarf went first to speak in his case to say it'll never work, you'll never persuade him. That's true, but I know someone who will, Mumm-ra said to Snarf. So, what was Mumm-ra's plan? Why, to disguise himself as Snarfer, but that would come later. So meanwhile, back with Snarf Oswald, who made his escape, that's when he accidentally ran into Lionel, the leader of the Thundercats. So Oswald wanted to know from Lionel if they are the Thundercats, and Lionel says that they are. I got bad news, Oswald said. All three Snarfs are being captured already. So meanwhile, in the Pyramid's tomb chamber, there they are. Snarf Egbert, Snarf, and Snarf are all being tied up, and they're in sarcophagus. But before they were put in the sarcophagus, what they saw was unbelievable. Mumm-ra granting his ancient spirits to disguise himself, as I mentioned earlier, told you we'd get back to it later, to disguise himself as Snarfer, who's Snarf's nephew. So now that Mumm-ra had disguised himself as Snarf's nephew Snarfer, he told his canine pal to lock them away in the sarcophagus, so that's what he did. So, meanwhile, back with the Thundercats who are following Snarf Oswald, who had earlier made his escape. So, Oswald had just told the Thundercats use extreme caution. Mumm-ra's pyramid is not that far away, he said. And then the Thundercats, along with Snarf Oswald, just found a spot where all the enslaved Snarfs are working, but it is empty. Back with Mumm-ra, who disguised himself as Snarfer earlier, since that he's sensing that the Thundercats will be heading their way, including Snarf Oswald, who made his escape, it was now time for him to head off on his mission. So back with the Thundercats and along with Snarf Oswald, so when Oswald saw Snarfer coming out, or that's what he thought, that's when they ran up to greet each other. Back with Chitara, she sensed that something was off. So Lena wanted to know what's going on with her, but she says she isn't sure, but she knows that something is wrong. That's not the real Snarfer, but neither the Thundercats nor Oswald were aware of it. So back with the two Snarfs who were hugging each other, or that's what Oswald and the Thundercats thought that was Snarfer, that's when Panther stepped forward. So the fake Snarfer said to Panther, well, it's good to see you. Then Panther said, do you realize what you've done? You ruined our mission, he said. Then Panther started reprimanding Snarfer, or so he thought, about how his uncle tricked him and etc. Then Panther says, I know you have good intentions, but you could have led us to Mumm-ra. But just when the fake Snarfer was about to plead his case, that's when Chitara says, take it easy on him, Panthro. You know he means well, she said. Then Panthro, though he agrees with Chitara, says, well, that may be true, but the good intentions alone are not good enough, he said. So after Panthro also pleaded his case to Snarfer, or so he thought, that he shouldn't have done what he did, that's when it's Chitara's turn to plead her case by asking a question. What happened to Snarf? Well, the fake Snarfer started to plead his case to Chitara to say that Snarf must have gotten out and freed the slaves himself and etc. Then the fake Snarfer also said that he manages to get out, but we all know that's not really the case. So Lionel had asked the fake Snarfer had Snarf had found the treasures yet, but the fake Snarfer said no. But the fake Snarfer says that even better, it's buried somewhere around here, he said. The fake Snarfer also came up with the suggestion that he knows where it is. You do? Lionel says. Where? Then the fake Snarfer suggested for Lionel to use his sword of omen so that it could be located. So everyone heads off after following the fake Snarfer's suggestion. Well, Chitara still sensed that something was off, but the Thundercats were not aware of this yet. And neither did Snarf Oswald that Snarfer was a fake, but so far he wasn't wrong. So the fake Snarfer says the sooner we find the treasure, the sooner we get out of here. So that's what Lionel did. He did what any good guy would do. Look through the sword's eye. And there it was, a gold chest, just like it was mentioned 2 episodes ago. And it has the treasures inside. So now that Lionel knows where the treasure is, so that's when the fake Snarfer says, well, what are we waiting for? Let's go find it. So the Thundercats, along with Snarf Oswald, went inside to where the chest was located at, just like what Lionel's sword said. But still, Chitara sensed that something was off. She had no idea. Plus, none of the Thundercats nor Snarf Oswald were aware that the real Snarfer, along with his uncle and Egbert, were still tied up in a pyramid. So back with Lionel, it was right where the 2 walls are, just like what the sword said. So Snarfer says, well, dig for it, Thundercats. That means the fake Snarfer almost let slip to the Thundercats. But then the fake Snarfer says, oh, sorry about that. I'm very excited, that's all, he said. So Lionel was the first to step forward with his sword and says, okay, everyone, stand back. So Lionel uses his sword power just like what any good guy would do. And there it is, just like what the sword said, a gold chest. So yes, it's true, the Thundercats found the treasure of Thundera. But when the fake Snarfer ran up first and went on top of the chest, he says, at last, my dream come true, it's all mine. Panther knew that what Chitara said was true and suspected. So Panther says, hey, what's going on with you? He asked. Then suddenly Lionel sort of almost just told Lionel of this warning, and that's when he should have realized what Jatara had suspected was absolutely true. That Snarfer was definitely a fake. And that's when the Thundercats should have known he was really Mumm-ra in disguise. They also should have realized that the real Snarfer, and along with his uncle and Snarf Egbert, were still tied up in the Pyramid's tomb chamber. So Mumm-ra pleads his case to say now that he's found the treasures. Unfortunately for the Thundercats, their fates have been sealed. Luckily for Snarf Oswald, he managed to make his getaway, while the rest of the Thundercats have a battle with Mumm-ra. First up was Panthro, but unfortunately he was unsuccessful. He was all tied up with his own nunchucks. Then Chitara goes next, but she didn't have any luck either. Next up is Tigra, but he too didn't have any luck, just like what Chitara and Panthro did, and he too was all tied up. Oh, before I go any further, that yes, it's also true, just like what Mumm-ra did in the beginning of the episode. He has the sword of Plunn-dar too. So anyway, back with Lionel, he's one-on-one with Mumm-ra himself. So after long story short, things didn't go so well for Lionel. Now the three of his friends are all tied up and he's unconscious at the moment. What Mumm-ra did, he picks up the gold chest, he puts it over his head, and then pleads his case to say, now that I found the treasures, once I get all the Thundercat secrets, I'll get rid of each and every one of you, he said. So yes, unfortunately, this is definitely bad news for the Thundercats, and even worse for the Snarfs too. What about Oswald? He has made his escape. Will he be able to free his three friends? And what about the Thundercats? What will they do now? Will they be able to do something about it? So that ends episode 3 in part 3.